The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. A sunny Tuesday here in Southern California. July 4th weekend has just passed us, and now it feels like the NFL lockout might be coming to an end. Those are the whispers. Those are the rumbles. On the Subway Fresh Take hotline right now from Rich Eisen's podcast, Mike Lombardi. What's happening, you adultering podcast guest?
I know I've been accused of cheating so often, it's ridiculous. But, I am well and excited for football to start.
It's going to happen soon. Doesn't it feel like all the feelers seem to indicate this will be the week that finally everything gets solved? But it seemed like last week everybody was like, oh, yeah, Tuesday or Wednesday they're going to announce it. And then there was some sort of a backstep. What do you think happened?
Well, I think, whenever you have as many lawyers in the room as both sides have, a word or two can send people into a frenzy, or how it positions or how it looks to the other side. So these things are very tedious, and they can break down at any time. Ultimately it's going to come down to what is the revenue split. I mean, it's easy for us to sit back and say, well, the players get 48, the owners get 52, but it's deciding on what's in that split. It's deciding on what is going to be in the pie, and I think that's where a lot of the arguments come in. And then the owners have their own issues. They're going to have to handle revenue sharing attached to the new deal and how that looks. And I think it's a three-pronged problem.
What was there ever a point during this whole process when you really got concerned, like, oh my God, there's not going to be football, and I'm just going to have my Sopranos box set, and I'll just have to start plowing through the episodes, and that'll be my Sunday?
Well, since the killing was so disappointing, I had nothing. There's no sense in buying that. I feel like, no, I never really was. I was very ultimately, having been a part of the '87 strike, I knew that we needed some form of financial deadline to face us to get both sides to the courts. March it's easy for players to say, hey, no big deal. We're not losing any money in March. There's no reason to negotiate. Let's let the courts take course. And I think as we get closer to the reality of we've got to pay our bills, owners and players, I think that brings both sides. And I use this quote often. Churchill used it back in the 40s, and it's the reality. Fear does the work of reason. And I think ultimately if you're fearful of losing a check, you'll reason much better. And I think that's what's really happened. And I knew, as I was told by many people in the room, we might lose a preseason game, but we were never going to lose the season.
Right. And that's where it deviated from what's happening with the NBA, I think, is that in the NFL, they were always trying to figure out how to split up the profit they were making. And it was just a case of, all right, well, here's the big pile of money, now how do we cut it up? And the NBA, the owners aren't making money, or they claim not to be making money. They open their books, but, they're down $300 million last season, but that doesn't really factor in all the tax write-offs they get, things like that. But when you look forward to where ticket revenue is going and stuff like that, like, they have real reason for concern. The NFL is doing great. There should be no reason for concern.
Well, yeah, add something to the issue. NBA teams, the value of their franchises are going down rapidly, and in the NFL, the value of the franchise are increasing rapidly, and the players and the league being so much a part of the fabric of the country, and everybody wants to see it. The players have never said to the owners, you buy the team. Jeff Lurie buys the Philadelphia Eagles for $212 million. It's worth $1 billion now. We're entitled to some of that money you've made. The players are never asking for that. So there is certainly, that side of the issue. But the NBA, the players are taking all the money, and the owners are losing the value of their franchises, and they all have for sale signs at the front door saying, hey, if you can turn a profit with this collective bargaining agreement, feel free to buy my team. I'll give it to you on 60 cents on a dollar. To me, that's a serious issue that the players, I don't think they've grasped in the NBA.
Yeah, and, when an NBA team like the Pistons or even the Sixers to some degree, when you hear about them potentially getting sold, you go, wow, somebody's really rolling the dice with that one.
Well, just think about the Sixers, Bill, for a second. Comcast owns the building. They own the Flyers. They own the Sixers. So So that, what do they say? They say the best thing to do in sports is to own the building, own the parking, own the concessions, own everything, and it's the greatest thing. And Comcast is saying the Sixers is not a viable option. We got to get rid of that thing. So that tells you how much the NBA deal doesn't work.
Right. And with football, the other thing they have going is that little carrot of the LA stadium. If that thing really comes together, so you take the two teams in the NFL, there's probably maybe 3-4 teams that aren't in great shape, and maybe it's not the right market or whatever, and they have that LA carrot they can just grab. There's no carrot like that in the NBA. I don't think.
No, and then there's also the carrot of Thursday Night Football, going to a complete 16-game season and selling 8 games of that off. So that's another huge financial windfall that's going to get into the pot. So the owners have a lot of different ways to monetize the NFL, and haven't really skimmed the surface. Once they get a collective bargaining agreement in place for 10 years, I think the NFL is going to take another may I step forward. I think you're going to see some of these teams really blossom, and the value of their franchise is going to go way up.
And you also, the other logical move, I think, for the NFL, and I don't know if it'll happen in the next 5 years, but I think maybe down the road, there will be a Europe team or two.
Has to be. There has to be some global presence in the NFL, and I think it'll be in Germany, because we remember when the World League was there were 5 World League teams in Germany, and I think, the way we are, air travel happens, and we can get from one place to the other fairly quickly. I think it's very conceivable we'll see some form of the NFL overseas and some international, whether it's Berlin, Vienna, somewhere like that.
Because it couldn't happen in basketball, too many games. Couldn't happen in baseball, too many games. Hockey, not going to happen. Football could happen. You have 8 home games, 8 road games. You could potentially play 3 road games in a row if you're like the London team. I think it'll be London and Germany if it happens. Let's say London comes over. They play the Patriots, the Panthers, and the Raiders. Then they fly back. Now they've banged out 3 of their games. They might only have to come over 3 times.
Right.
And then you look at, they only have to host 8 games.
Right.
So, you split
and whoever
it up
they play could get a bye the week after they play.
Right.
Yeah,
Easy.
so it's very conceivable.
Yeah. I don't know if the NFL needs more teams, because I do think there's a couple cities that aren't working. I'm also not sold. Everybody points to Toronto. It seems like everything's Buffalo. Just it would be logical if they leave Buffalo, they just go to Toronto. I don't know if that would happen. I'm not sold on that scenario.
I think Buffalo and Toronto I know they're different, parts of, the United States and Canada, but I think that whole area, when you're an NFL team, you have to capture the entire area. You just can't be to that city, or else you're not going to make any money. And I think that's probably Jacksonville's biggest problem, is the city isn't big enough to support them, and the surrounding area clearly isn't big enough to support them. And that was the mistake in going to Jacksonville.
Yeah, not just for a team, but for the Super Bowl. They blew it, though, because they should have taken Tebow, and they would have bought themselves 4 years while everybody got excited about him, and then we found out whether he was a real quarterback or not. But they could have bought themselves 4 years there.
See, and the move I think they should have made is Michael Vick. I think Michael Vick was the move that could have electrified that town even more, because it's southern Georgia. It really had a way to where if they could have gotten through the first phase of bad PR, he could have really electrified that area down there. And that really, to me, as I look back on that, the Eagles signing him was a great move, but Jacksonville not signing him was a $100 million mistake.
Good segue, Mike Lombardi. Because stuff's going to happen now, and it's going to happen at one of the most frantic rates I think we've ever seen in the history of sports. I think the only comparison you might be able to make is the 99 NBA lockout, when all of a sudden they had this new system and a bunch of guys had to change teams. This is going to be even crazier. One of the big chess pieces, Kevin Kolb. So where does he go?
Well, that's a great one. The Eagles claim they've got a high offer on the table. Nobody seems to know where that could be. Arizona, some of the players in Arizona thinks it could be them. I don't see it there. All the teams that drafted quarterbacks are talking about actually starting their quarterbacks, so they wouldn't be in play. The Minnesotas and the Tennessees that spent first-round picks on quarterbacks, I don't see that being in play. My guess would be Seattle, and that's just a guess. I think Seattle is looking for a veteran quarterback to match up to their team. He kind of fits what they do. Darrell Bevel's the offensive coordinator, and that's just a guess. I think they have trouble signing Matt Hasselbeck, and I think they feel like they can manipulate their draft to get whatever they want. So I'm guessing Seattle here, but I'm not certain on where this is going to transpire.
Seattle, what if it's not Seattle?
Well, you've got all those, Washington seems committed to John Beck, so they can't dip back and make another trade there. Miami's the other wild card, and Miami is, certainly a team that needs to get a quarterback, but is Kevin Cobb more proven than Chad Henne? We can argue that back and forth for days, but I don't think anybody's going to be right or accurate on what case they make for either side. Both of them are developing quarterbacks. So, Miami has to be in play.
Hold on, I just made the groan of somebody who's actually wagered on Chad Henne in the past, and I just don't see. Well,
you didn't wager on Kevin Cobb. That's your problem. See, if you would have had you see, there's some games Kevin Cobb, and I've said this before. If the Eagles would have started Kevin Cobb, they're a 7-9 team. His eye level's way down. Right. He's very scattered in the pocket. He's not comfortable. And then if the Eagles didn't sign Michael Vick, they would have never been there. So, I get your point on Chad Henne. He was very slow, very, very deliberate, and maybe some of that was coaching. Maybe they feel like they could coach him out of that. I'm not sure you can, but last year he didn't improve from his rookie year to his second year, not at all.
What about Brian Hoyer?
I like Brian Hoyer. When I was talking to the 49ers, in my mind, I thought Brian Hoyer was one kid that could come into a team like, especially with a Jim Harbaugh, a guy he grew up in Ohio. He was, went to Michigan State, was a team captain for 3 years. He was a leader of the team. He goes there. He studies under Tom Brady. I thought he was the perfect guy for a team like San Francisco to go get and to put him with a Jim Harbaugh who was very similar. Now, Jim decided to draft Colin Kaepernick, and I think, that's going to be an interesting development because Kaepernick's accuracy makes Jake Locker look like he's pinpointing his accuracy. So it's really going to be off the wall. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. But I like Brian Hoyer. I think he's a really good prospect, and I think he has the kind of leadership qualities and the toughness to be a really good player. The touchdown throw he makes against Miami in the corner, and I don't know if he threw it to Taylor Mays. I'm not sure which was Taylor Jacobs. I'm not sure who he threw it to in the back corner. It was one of the great throws of all. He had a guy right in his face, and he took it right on the chin, and he made a great throw.
That's the guy that I don't think people are talking about because the Pats got Mallett. And, I would say that Hoyer has more value right now than he's probably ever going to have.
I agree.
A year from now, they'll trade him.
I agree. I wrote that. I thought that, to me, before they took Mallett, even before they even entertained Mallett, I mean, look, they took Mallett in the third round because he got to them. I mean, they wouldn't have taken him in the second because they felt comfortable enough with Hoyer, but the value of Mallett became so obvious they had to take him in the third. And I was a Hoyer guy. I just don't think – I think the problem in the NFL is like any league. Hoyer was a college free agent. Every team has bad college reports on Hoyer. He wasn't very highly rated by the scouts. So if you like Hoyer in a tape, you go back and, well, what our scouts think of him? Oh, they didn't like him. There's not enough urgency to really make the move. Now, say Bill O'Brien were to become a head coach somewhere next year. He knows Brian Hoyer, just like Scott Pioli knew Matt Castle. And then I think you would see some people start to get interested in him. It's going to take, one thing about the NFL, it takes sponsorship for the players sometimes to have a career.
I thought maybe, Belichick's always up to stuff. I thought maybe it'd be like one of those, you trade him for the third-round pick, but if he starts, 14 games over that year, that gets bumped to a second, or, one of those kind of rigged deals. But I could see him doing something like that.
I could see him doing it because he knows that, with Mallett now he's got another inexpensive quarterback. It's funny when he made the Seymour trade, somebody in the league, a president of a team, sent me an email when he heard about the trade, and he said, well, he just got Brady's replacement, figuring that pick would have been a high first-round pick, and he would have been able to draft a quarterback and redshirt him, and here he goes and gets Mallett in the third round and basically achieved the same thing with only doing it in the third round. Now, Mallett's got to prove he can be a good player, which I think he can, but I think there's a lot of possibilities there.
He gets to go to Tom Brady camp for 2 years.
And with the missing
scholarship.
Bill, the missing element on Ryan Mallett is that he's been tough coached his whole life. His dad's a coach, and you go to Bobby Petrino, that's not a walk in the park. You're getting coached, you're getting MF'd constantly. You can't be thin-skinned there. So he's been coached hard, and he knows what it takes to be a good player, and I think the Brady element is only going to enhance that. I mean, this isn't a kid who comes in with the Jeff George, I got it, don't worry. No, he understands he's got to get it.
Let me throw another name at you, Mr. Matt Leinart.
I don't see it with Matt Leinart. I watched him in.
Wow, you're out. You're out on Matt Leinart.
I'm out on Matt Leinart. I don't see it, and here's why. I don't see the leadership. I don't see him being in a huddle and taking the team over. I don't see the team rallying behind him. I was really disappointed when I first reported about Matt Leinart being out at Arizona, and there wasn't one player that came to his defense. Jay Cutler gets hurt in a playoff game, and every Bear player is rallying to this defense. Matt Leinart, nobody's rallying to him. And, when you really study the tape on Matt Leinart, his eye level was way down. He had no patience in the pocket. He had no sense of rhythm at all. He can't get away from anybody, so he can't make a play on the move. And I just don't think he's not going to get any better. I don't think this is one of those deals where you can turn him around. And I think the fact that they drafted a quarterback in the 4th or 5th round, Houston, the Texans did, I think that tells you all you need to know.
I like that this eye level thing you keep saying. I think this could be your thing. It's like Jay Billis and Wingspan. Little thing.
I love that. I mean, Billis is remarkable. I mean, he was firing those wingspans off on the day of the draft. I mean, it was unbelievable. You'd have gotten if you would have gotten a homeless person, up there on the draft, he would have had that wingspan too.
He
but
knows
eye level, so people understand what eye level is a quarterback has to be able to see down the field, and when he gets hit like a boxer, his eyes start to come down, and a quarterback comes off the field and says, well, the left tackle took a bad set, or the right guard wasn't good. His eye level's way down, and when a quarterback's throwing the ball down the field, when your average per attempt is over 8 yards, like it is for Phillip Rivers' career, your eye level's never coming down. It's staying down the field. It's always up the field, and that's really important to be a successful quarterback. And when you get hit, you have a tendency to lower your eye level, and guys can't get it back up, and I think that's the problem with Leinart.
I asked about Leinart because I ran into one of his old USC teammates recently, and we were talking about Leinart, and I was like, are you surprised that he's not a good player, or hasn't been a good player in the NFL? And his response was, yes, I'm actually really surprised. I thought he was a sure thing, and I was talking to him about, what about him in the huddle? Did you feel like he had the right confidence? Because, we've talked about this. I feel like quarterbacks, it's 70% attitude and charisma and coolness and, all those things that just seem like they matter more than we ever give them credit for. And he felt like he had all that stuff in USC. He introduced the theory that he goes to Arizona, he's on the team with Kurt Warner, and Kurt Warner, one of the most naturally gifted throwers we've had in the league in the last 30 years, it's always assumed he's going to take the job from Warner. Warner's throwing BBs, he's throwing bullets, he's having a career renaissance, and Leinart just loses his confidence.
But Leinart was given the job 2 times. And both times he couldn't keep it. He was given the job one year. Kurt wasn't supposed to be the start of the Super Bowl year. Right. Leinart was, and Leinart was so bad that they had to take it back. He lost his teammates. And I think what happens to Leinart is when he's under pressure, he can't really throw accurately enough. He can't drive the ball. His ball tends to sail on him, and it gets intercepted, and he's not very good at making decisions with the ball in his hands. Everybody talks about USC being a pro-style offense. Well, they run some pro plays, but it isn't a pro-style. There's no college team that runs a true pro-style. I would say Arkansas probably runs the closest to a pro-style offense of any college team. There's a lot more sophistication to the pro game, and really Leinart, when he got into the league, couldn't make very good decisions. He wasn't quick with the football, and then once he got hit, it was all over.
Well, I do wonder, though, if you're playing with a guy that he's better than you, and you know he's better than you, and your teammates know he's better than you, but yet you're getting the chance to start because you're Matt Leinart and you got drafted 7th or whatever he went, and you need to take over this team. But the other guy is clearly better, and every time you're doing drills with him or whatever, anytime that guy goes in, the team runs better, maybe you just break down from that. I don't know. I mean, the flip side to this is if Pete Carroll thought Leinart was going to be really good, because he coached him, he would have traded for him last year, and he didn't.
Or signed him when he was on the street, Yeah. And I watched him I watched Greg Knapp, the quarterback coach of the Houston Texans, work him out before the Dallas game when I was down there, and it just didn't seem there's ever a sense of urgency with Matt Leinart. There's never seems to be, I'm really determined to be a great pro. There's not that sense of, hey, I'm going to win this thing, I'm going to beat you out, I'm going to take everything over. It just seems like I'm cool, man. I got everything under control, and those things never work.
I hate to keep talking about quarterbacks, but it's clear year after year it's the most important position. Are there any of these rookies coming in this year that you think can start and actually be good right away?
I think the only one could be is Mallett. He's, like I said, I thought Arkansas had the most pro-style ready game of anybody, so I think he could if he went to another team other than New England where he's not going to play. I think Jake Locker's accuracy is going to really put him behind the eight ball. I think it's going to be very difficult. And I don't want to hear this crap about, they got, Chris Johnson and he can run the ball. To me, the worst thing is when a quarterback can't throw accurately enough, the team's going to put pressure, the other opponent's going to put pressure on you to make throws. So Chris Johnson really hurts him more than helps him because everybody's going to gang up and really demand that he throw the ball. And in the Tennessee offense or with the Chris Palmer, what they need to do in Tennessee is throw the ball outside the numbers, which is really where Locker wasn't very good. He wasn't very good anywhere on throwing the football. I think Ponder is, Ponder's one of those mystery guys to me. I'm not sure about his leadership skills. There's times where he looks like he could be an effective player with Minnesota. They've got some offensive line issues. Their two tackles have to play better before any rookie quarterback is going to be successful. Loadholder, McKinney. So I think that's going to be a real situation. And of course, Cam Newton. I think Cam Newton is the wild card. I mean, he can be as good as he wants to be in the right style of offense that could lend himself to playing early. Because what Cam's never going to do is run a sophisticated offense. So earlier is better for Cam. And then I think Blaine Gabbert's going to take some time to really. They brought Blaine Gabbert in because they don't feel David Garrard has the eye of the tiger. They feel when David Garrard leaves the facility, then football's behind him. He could care less about the game. They don't feel like David Garrard is committed to excellent winning. They think he's a good player, and they like him, but they don't think he has that innate intangible that really drives and really wants to be a great pro. Now, maybe with Gabbert there, he'll bring that intensity out of him. I'm not sure, but I think that's really where it is. Now, Jack Del Rio's always on a 1 year. It looks like his job's always in jeopardy every year, so I think Garrard will be the starter, but I think Gabbert, if he looks good, can keep putting heat on him.
Yeah, and they probably get a little bit of the blame with Garrard because they gave him a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if you're going to make that kind of investment, especially if you're one of the smaller market teams, you better make sure you're 100% on who you're paying. But, another interesting thing about this lockout ending, usually when we have free agent signings, the teams try to get who they try to address whatever need, they try to get whatever. Then it's done, and then they go to the draft, and it's like, oh crap, we still don't have a pass rush. We didn't get the three guys we wanted. I'm going to draft a linebacker or whatever. This year it flipped. You have a team like the Patriots that has no pass rush. If they didn't come out of this free agency without somebody who could rush the passer, it's going to be a real hole. Same thing like if you don't have a quarterback yet, like if you're Carolina and you're not sure that Cam can come through this year, then what do you do? So what do you think is there a team that could really be screwed if they don't get the right guy?
Well, I think the team when we're going to have a cap, and I think most fans in America aren't counting on the cap being bothersome to some teams, and I think you saw the Jets not signing either wide receivers because they weren't sure what the cap was, and they wanted to make sure they could structure the deal correctly. So I think there's some teams that are going to be hindered by the cap. I think the Cowboys will be hindered by the cap. I think the Raiders will be hindered by their cap. I think there'll be a lot of teams that have some cap concerns that'll keep them out of the market. And then I think, this is the perfect situation for the agents because if, hypothetically, say the Patriots want to sign Matt Roth and there's three other teams that need him, and now the Patriots aren't going to go all in or bid all the way, so they're either going to get him at their price or they're going to walk. But typically, I think, that sets up perfectly for the desperate teams which will overpay for the player. And this really was why free agency falls apart because you end up paying for something you want even though it won't be something you get.
Asamoah is the big prize. Ravens, Jets, Cowboys. You keep hearing. Who else are you hearing from him?
I keep hearing. I've heard Green Bay. I've heard Philadelphia. I think he wants to go somewhere where he can win, and he needs to go somewhere where he can play press corner. Baltimore makes a lot of sense because of the guy that's there. Chuck Pagano, the defensive coordinator, was with Nnamdi in Oakland with us, so he has he's close to him. He understands him. And I think Baltimore will play the style of defense that's conducive to what Nnamdi wants to do. Nnamdi shouldn't go somewhere like Philly where Asante Samuel plays off. Nnamdi's not going to play off and be effective playing off. He needs to put his hands on you. He needs to be physical at the line of scrimmage. He needs to play like the Green Bay corners. Green Bay's the ideal situation for him, but Green Bay probably isn't going to pay that kind of money for a corner. But I do think this, and talking to a lot of people about Nnamdi, he's not going to sign with the team for the money. He's made his money the last 3 years in Oakland. I think he wants to go somewhere he feels like it's a really good team, it's a really good locker room, and it's really going to be able to win for more than just 1 year.
You know what my counter to that is?
Yeah.
It's always about the money.
You know, I look, I'm a big believer it's always about the money, but this case and knowing the kid, I do think it's going to come. Now, I think his agent is going to be about the money, but I do think this kid is strong enough that if it's close, and I think he's going to understand I got to go somewhere that best suits me. This is a different kind of kid intellectually, and I think he understands it, and he's taken a step back, and he's smart enough to realize what's the right situation as he gets older for the end of his career. But typically at the agents, it's all about the money.
Any other big chess pieces that you feel like could really sway a division?
Well, I think obviously the quarterbacks are going to have to, we're going to have to sort through all those. I mean, if they trade Donovan McNabb, and not that McNabb's going to be a starter there, and they're paying him $12 million, is John Beck really good enough? Can he carry that team? And I think that's going to be as always, it's the quarterbacks that are going to be the interesting chess pieces that move forward. I think the trades. I think there's going to be some teams that will trade. Where's Steve Smith going to go? Is he going to stay in Carolina, or is he going to be that piece that comes out? And I think Sidney Rice is another viable piece that, like a team like New England needs an outside receiver. Some of these teams that need receivers can really, are they going to go after Sidney Rice? Can he make a difference? And I think the other guy that could really make a team a lot better in the right role is Darren Sproles. I think Sproles goes to a St. Louis and is a nickel back for Josh McDaniels in the Kevin Falk role. I think that could really give St. Louis a huge step forward.
What about D'Angelo Williams?
I think he's a really good running back, and I think that certainly he's going to be, productive for whatever team he gets to. But typically, and I know I get a lot of mail on this, running backs don't sway where you go. I mean, it's the quarterback and it's the big plays that you need to win games. And I have a sense that Carolina is going to try to sign him because Jonathan Stewart, as much as I love him, he can't stay healthy. He couldn't stay healthy at Oregon, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy in the pros. And I think D'Angelo is I think there'll be other running backs out there. I mean, look, Reggie Bush is going to be out there too. Not that he's a running back. Reggie Bush is a specialty back. But there's going to be, other guys, and I just get the sense from watching the league, you don't have to pay a lot of money for running backs. They seem to be all over the place.
It's a fair point. The VP of Common Sense would nod with that point. But at the same time, D'Angelo Williams, I can't remember if it was 2 years ago, but there was 1 year where he was like a top 5 fantasy back.
Oh, he was
still
great.
like under 28. Like it just feels like he's a pretty big chess piece.
He's really a good player, and he's going to get a huge deal. But do you want to tie all your money? See, the cap's coming back, and you got to be careful how much money you tie up in your cap. I mean, would he be an effective player for, let's say, a team that needs a real running back? Yeah, sure he would be, but do you want to put that much money into him? And what other pieces can you solve? I mean, you're willing to sometimes say, this guy, I'll go with this back even though he's not quite as good. I think the piece you're missing here is Tiki Barber. I think he could sway the balance in the NFL.
No, come on.
No, I'm kidding. I mean, to me, I think somebody must have gave Tiki a promise of a job, or else there's no reason he'd come back. Because one thing I know about old running backs, they never get better as the year goes on. That's a proven fact. And B, at 36, if you're not the featured back, that means you have to cover kicks. And do you think Tiki Barber's going to start covering kicks at this point in his life?
And then C, who wants him in the locker room?
After
what he did to the Giants. Well, Lombardi, I live my life by the code WWBBD. What would Bill Belichick do?
Yes.
And Bill Belichick would not spend a lot of money for a free agent running back because that's not what Bill Belichick does. But I do wish that he would spend money on somebody that could at least make a quarterback go, this time when I go back to pass, I might get hit by that guy. And the Patriots don't have anyone like that. So who's out there that the Patriots could get?
Well, I think Matt Roth's an interesting player for them. I think he could remind them of Mike Vrabel earlier in his career. Matt Roth is a defensive lineman, not really a defensive end. He's had 7 sacks. He's a real physical player. He could set the edge at the end of the line of scrimmage. I think along with Jermaine Cunningham, he might give them the two kind of players they need to run their style of defense most effectively. But, the market's few and far between of rushers that come off the corner. Most people don't let a guy who could sack the quarterback out there. And I think, like when they signed Vrabel the first year there, I think they'll find a guy, and it'll be a guy. They think Jermaine Cunningham's going to come on next year and really develop and become maybe the sacker that they hoped he was when they drafted him. Whether that remains to be seen, I don't know. But I think they're counting on that. This offseason not being in their program hurts that. Player development is going to suffer. I think everybody's talking about the lack of impact the rookies make, which will be an effect, but it always is a fact. to me, if you're a good team, your rookie class always benefits your next year's team, not the current team. Now, New England's defensive team, because they needed so many players, it did. But I think the development of those second-year players, the Patrick Chungs, the Jermaine Cunninghams, the Brandon Spikes, those guys, without the off-season, I think you could see those guys not getting any better, and that can hurt your team as much as anything.
The other team that I think is going to be really interesting is the Falcons, because they basically went all in at the draft. They moved up. They overpaid to get, is it Julio Jones or Julio Jones?
Julio.
I can't remember. Julio Jones. All right. I wanted to make sure I had that. You know I can't pronounce names.
You're talking to me? I mean,
I know. That's true.
I mean, I'm the worst.
Yeah, we're between the two of us. We're actually way on the under on mispronouncing.
I was impressed with you during the NBA draft. You were spurting out in the last podcast. You were doing the European names. Thank you.
Yeah, I went to. I had some work. I had some secret
Chad's word was impressive. He was rattling them off there like he was doing them well.
It was good. It was a good effort. So the Falcons went all in with that trade. They don't have number one next year. They're kind of, I'm sure they're getting a lot of preseason buzz as a Super Bowl favorite once everything shakes out, because they kind of fit that profile of got a little taste last year. They have the quarterback who's on the way up, good home field, good young team. They made their move in the draft. Do you feel like they're one player away from maybe being the favorite here?
Not at all, and I think they'll be a team that really spends money in free agency because they have to. I think they have to really justify what they did. I think they're, you don't give up as many yards, 443 yards, I think it was to the Packers, and all those points at home. And again, when you play at home in a dome, your defense should be better. It's very tough to evaluate your defense in a dome stadium at home because the crowd noise has such an effect. It really hurts. It's hard to run the football in the crowd noise at home. So, your run defense should be better, and you should be able to rush the passer. I think they're counting on John Abraham to be a really good player next year at his age, and, that he could be and he couldn't be. They need somebody on the other side. I could see them spending a lot of money and overpaying for that one outside guy like they did with Dante Robinson last year, even though he's not a great cover corner. And then they need another cover corner. I mean, they need pieces to their defense. The schedule's going to get tougher. I think there's a lot going against. They've got to re-sign this offensive line, and it's really an offensive line that's good for them. It's not always good for other teams. I mean, if Harvey Dahl went somewhere else, it'd have to be the style of offense that Atlanta uses for him to be effective. He couldn't just show up on any campus and work out. So they've got a lot of moving parts, and I think they're not as good. And that's what I argued about the trade. To me, the strength of the Falcons is supposed to be their drafting, and giving up all those picks, you moved away from your strength. And I don't think they were just one player away.
And now
people say, well, we're going to team them up with Tony Gonzalez and Roddy White, and we're going to be fabulous. And and if this was 2004, I'd say, yeah, that's really going to work out well. But Tony Gonzalez in 2011 is not even close to being a good player. I mean, he's just a so-so player right now. He's easy to cover. I thought he was going to retire. He says he's coming back one more year. But at the end of the season last year, it was Roddy White, and nobody was worried about anybody else on the Falcons team.
Yeah. And also, you left out rookie receivers never really lighted up.
And again, without the OTA days, and I think the thing that bothers me about Julio is I never saw his speed that he worked out on the field when he played at Alabama. I think he shows speed against certain people, but not all people. And when you run 4.3, you usually show speed against everybody.
You think the shortened training camps, if you're a first-year coach, isn't that a major disadvantage?
It's huge. It really is. I think you have to really focus on the first 4 games, and you've got to really focus on trying to get enough installed in your practices that you can have the ability to execute the first 4 games without having to start scheming things up. I think the fundamental teams will come out of this thing the most effective, the teams that work on their basics, the teams that are really have their foundation of their offense and defense in place, that really stress fundamentals will be the best. I think you can't ask your rookies to do everything because they can't. So again, you got to do what Bill Walsh always would say. Well, let's teach them the playbook the first year, and we'll develop their skills within the playbook the second year. And I think you're going to have to pick your spots for a lot of the rookies when they come in and utilize them in those areas.
Yeah, because normally I would have been looking at San Francisco and been like, wow, that team underachieved. It was really poorly coached, and now they have a real coach, and that is a team that should make a leap. But now he's a coach that will have 8 weeks to work on the team before they launch. Now I'm looking at last year's standings. I think Dallas is a team because Garrett was in place. Most of that team was in place. 6-10, you could say they underachieved. Detroit, 6-10 last year. Stafford got hurt. I think they were in a lot of games. That coach comes back. They're pretty interesting. Houston, which neither of us can understand why Kubiak got brought back again, but now maybe coming off the lockout, not a terrible thing that he got brought back, except for the part that he can't coach. But that team's pretty talented too. So which one of those teams do you like?
I like Detroit. I'm not ever going to jump in the Houston boat until they show me they're tough. And they've yet to do that. They have any toughness. And this Mario Williams coming as an outside linebacker, I'm going to need to watch it on tape to really buy it. They say, well, he's like DeMarcus Ware. He's really not like DeMarcus Ware. It's really going to be interesting to see how this all plays out and to see how they have a nose tackle that can operate inside. So I'm not on Houston. I think Detroit's the team. If Stafford can stay healthy, I think that's a key component for them. They've got to be able to keep him. They've added the receivers. They've got running backs, and their offensive line still not quite great, but they're still good enough. And then the defense is really starting to come along. So I think you'll see them being a little bit active in free agency. And I think they're the team that can really close the gap. They got a taste of being good. Now they got to get great. And I think there should be a sense of desperation there, in sense of having the drive and the initiative to want to become a good team. And being on a short, defensively they don't do a lot, so they'll be able to come back and they'll work on the fundamentals and execute. And offensively, they've always done a good job of scheming against their opponents. I think Scott Linehan may not have been a great head coach, but he's a very good play caller. And I think that helps them. And I think if Stafford proves he can stay healthy, this can be a huge difference for the team. Titus Young's going to be the key, though, for them, because with getting him as the third receiver, it takes some of the pressure off. And if he can make the plays as he did at Boise, if he can give them that Deshaun Jackson element, that Philadelphia, I think this offense can be unbelievably explosive.
Well, and then they lucked out in the draft. They got somebody that shouldn't have fell to them.
Right. In an area of strength.
I like him more than you, yeah. But
well, I like him in this locker room, though. I didn't like him if he would have gone to a locker room where he would have been the dog. See, he comes into this locker room, and he's not even close to being the dog. He's in the back of the pack. So,
yeah, see, I loved it because, first of all, I liked him. And, I actually watched some college football last year. I always thought that guy was the best guy on the field for them. But we're talking about Nick Fairley, by the way.
Yeah.
But putting him on that team, it was already a strength, what they had, and now he's in. And as you said, he can't be the dog because he's on a team where you got to really rise up because these other guys are good too. That could be the best D-line in the league.
Yeah, and D-lines win games. Now, you add the fact they're playing in a dome. So it's going to be tough. There'll be crowd noise in there. It'll be tough to run the football on them, and it'll also be tough to pass protect. I mean, you got to make sure Green Bay's got to make sure Chad Clifton stays healthy, because if he's not, then this really swings the balance of power where Detroit all of a sudden can really maybe beat them and go up there and give them a game. They gave them a game up there in Green Bay. They give them a game all the time. The Green Bay offensive line, if you're going to get Rodgers and you're going to make them really hurt, you got to hit them. And this line can hit them. And I think Minnesota has moved closer to Detroit than further away from Detroit. And then, of course, Chicago, I think, has benefited from the schedule. Their offensive line is not a strength. So they're in a conference where two of the teams, Minnesota and Chicago's offensive line isn't the strength. And Green Bay is really the one area that you always worry about Green Bay's line. Their team is their offensive line, and I think that really lends itself to Detroit being a good team.
And as you said, you mentioned the big if with Matthew Stafford. That's the if, because if he's not healthy, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, he's got to stay healthy, and he's got to be able to play through the injuries. He's going to get hurt again, but he can't have these 6-week injuries. He's got to be able to prove his body can withstand the punishment. And that's the problem people don't understand about quarterbacks. Guys come in, they look good for a game, but if they can't prove they can take the hits and keep on ticking, what good is it?
I know you're not allowed to comment on this, but I'm just going to throw it out because we're on the topic. The Super Bowl future
betting thing.
Super Bowl future odds. The Lions are surprisingly good, only 30-1. To put that in perspective, the Bears are also 30-1. The Cowboys are 20-1. The Rams are 60-1. So it does seem like people have their eye on the Lions a little bit. The Rams, because of that division, I think you have to at least, I thought that was a good start for them last year. They had their franchise quarterback. They added some pieces in the draft. Maybe one or two signings. They might be interesting, right? Maybe
they'll be really interesting. I think, Bradford will take a huge step. I mean, having Josh McDaniels with them, I think is going to be a great for his career. Their offense was very vanilla last year. It was very simplistic. It was West Coast 101. It was day one install of the West Coast offense. It was very boring. I think this year, and that coach got a head coaching job. You figure that out. But moving forward, I think that with him there, with McDaniels in there, coaching the quarterback, we'll see him play well. I think you'll see some weapons. Their offense, they can attack the middle of the field. Danny Amendola will become Wes Welker-type player. They need that one outside receiver, and if they sign a nickel running back, I think they can do what New England did offensively, which is control the middle of the field with their passing game, and if they have an opportunity to get outside, have a player who can make a play. That's what New England needs. They need that outside receiver.
Yeah, and it's super early to talk about this stuff. I haven't done any of my research yet. I go into my bunker.
Yes.
Get out everything. But, I do think it's important. Like if the Rams got Sidney Rice, and Sidney Rice is the guy we think he is, and maybe not the fluke guy who had the one good season and then got hurt, and maybe he's the next Alvin Harper. I do think there's some risk with that signing. But if he's good, that's they need a number one receiver. You can't have Sam Bradford and not have a number one guy.
Right, but look, your team in what year was it? Where Jabbar Gaffney and Raish Caldwell? I mean, who was that receiving core they had there?
Yeah, what happened? We lost on 3rd and 3 because we couldn't get a 3rd and 3, or we couldn't stretch the field.
I think they have to find a back who can control the middle of the field. I think a nickel. I think they need somebody to complement Steven Jackson. And then I think they got to find that outside receiver. I don't think you can just find a number one. People use this number one receiver like there's one on every corner, and they're hard to find. I think they have to find somebody who can threaten the outside quadrant of the field where you have to defend it. New England didn't have that guy. When Revis came over and took away Branch, that took away the one guy that they could utilize. If they would have had another guy on the outside quadrant, they might have been able to get away with it. But that's what they need mostly. And I think receivers, and I know I'm a basketball fan, but I think you really have to have your receiving core be like a basketball team. You have to have a power forward type receiver, the big outside guy who can really physically get the ball. You've got to have the point guard. That's the Wes Welker, the guy who can go inside and shake. And then you need the small forward, the athletic guy who can kind of move all over the place. So you have to me, receivers have to blend. It's a group that has to blend perfectly together and fit it together. It just can't be three guys go out there and let's run routes.
Have you written that theory yet?
I think I have. I mean, it's something I live by.
I like that one. Hey, listen, you throw these out sometimes. I call them out when they're good. That was a good one.
I think you have to, when you set up your draft board, you have to put the receivers. Look, the easiest thing to do is for scouts is to go out and grade a receiver because it's easy. He catches the ball, oh, he's good, or he runs past somebody, boy, he's fast. But it does nothing for you in pro football because you have to define what the receiver can do for your team. And so when you put them in categories, okay, where is he going to play for us? Is he the point guard receiver? Is he the power forward receiver? Is he the small forward receiver? And then define the role he's going to play. That tells me what he can do and what he can't do. Julio Jones, is he going to be an outside quadrant receiver? Or is he going to be a slot receiver? Which is he going to be? Is he a power forward? Or is he a small forward? He's definitely not the point guard. So I think you have to define it, and then what you don't have, you better go get.
I like this theory. So, and then you flip it around with the Sixers. They were kind of like they had too many guards.
Right. They're the
They had too many Deion Branches.
Exactly. And so they had to play a certain way, and once you took that game away from them, which half the league could do, they can't win. And that's the thing about basketball, teaches you that you have to have a team versatile enough to play left-handed. And that's why you can win. And I think that's why if you study basketball enough, pro basketball, it helps you really look at the NFL and decide, because it's still the same. It's a game of matchups.
Yep. All right, last thing quickly, because we didn't talk about the Super Bowl teams. Green Bay is in really good shape because of how many good young players that they got. There isn't anything I'm missing with them, right? They're not going to lose anybody major. They're going to.
The key to Green Bay's success. They're going to let Cullen Jenkins walk. So it's going to be interesting to see what they have in store there. They do a great job of finding players. So I'm not saying they can't. I mean, Howard Green? Howard Green came in and played well in the Super Bowl. They picked him up off the Jets. So I think they'll find a way. Although I like Cullen Jenkins a lot as a player, I think that they'll probably have an answer there. The key area is they must keep Chad Clifton healthy. If Chad Clifton's not healthy, they're not the same team. They come closer to the pack. The left tackle position in Green Bay is clearly the most important. And whether they can find a young player to come in there and be good, they haven't been able to do that. When they lost Clifton that year, 2 years ago, they weren't the same team.
I saw Rodgers last week because he was taping this ESPYs nomination thing, and he's pretty happy. You forget, because we got trapped in this lockout thing. He's the reigning king now. He's pretty happy with where he's at.
He should be, and I mean, the key is he has to take the Tom Brady approach, where even though he's happy, He's got to be able to just keep going. And going back to Green Bay, I mean, they draft Derek Sherrard. So they got to make Sherrard. I mean, that's where this is going to hurt them this year because of the lockout. They can't get Sherrard ready to play right away. So that's why it's more important for Clifton to stay healthy. I know people are going to say, well, they drafted a first-round left tackle. Well, it's going to take a while for him to get ready.
And the Steelers, which, you could argue that they underachieved a little bit because of the Roethlisberger distraction, and then they came together and got it going. But, I feel like they're going to be better this year.
They will be because they'll have their offensive line more intact. They lose two of their tackles now. Willie Colon's going to be a free agent. Whether they re-sign him or not, I don't know. But I think they'll be a much better offensive line next year than they were. I think they know who they are as a football team now. I think Ben's a better locker room guy than he's ever been. I think Pittsburgh's still going to be a very tough team to deal with. They're going to have to figure out what they do in the secondary. If they let Ike Taylor walk, if he goes, how they handle that, and if they find the right guy to fit in for those places. But Pittsburgh's all about rushing the passer. All they want their corners to do, even people laugh when I say it, they want them to tackle. Tackling's more important for the Steelers than actually covering because they know the rush is going to get there.
And a healthy Polamalu, because I will never think that he was healthy in the playoffs last year. And then a distraction-free Roethlisberger. That's, he last year was all about continuing to bring up the stuff that happened to him in the past. It's not going to happen this year. And then we throw in the part where, as we talked about earlier, the shortened training camp. What team is better positioned to take advantage of that? Like if you remember in 1999 with the NBA lockout, the teams that did really well in that regular season were the veteran teams like Miami, San Antonio, these teams that had kind of been together, knew each other, and had the coach and things like that. And I do wonder if that's going to happen with the NFL. It just doesn't seem like when is our first game supposed to be?
It's supposed to be, I think, somewhere in August. But like you take Pittsburgh.
No, I mean the first regular season game.
Oh, September. I think the weekend of September 11th, whatever that weekend is. That'll kick off.
But it'll be that Thursday though. I mean that's less than 8 weeks away now. That doesn't seem like a lot of time to get a football.
Look, Aaron Smith can defensive tackle for Steve. He can cough twice and go play. I mean, it's no big deal for him. He can go out there and play. And I think it helps Pittsburgh because they're so old in their defensive line. By not having training camp, they'll be able to keep those guys a little fresher.
I think it helps them. I think it helps Green Bay. I think the Patriots get helped. I think the Jets. These teams that have had a coach for a couple years now and they kind of know who they are and they had a little taste of it last year. I think those teams do well. I just think it's going to be too hard for some coach to come in. Now they got to sign all their free agents over the next week and a half. Now they got to get on the field. What do we have? Impossible.
Right.
I don't see how it gets done.
And the good teams will take advantage of the personnel mistakes because as soon as teams come back, new coaches. I always would monitor the teams with new coaches really closely because I always felt like they were going to make mistakes because they didn't know the players. And this is even going to be more. There's going to be a couple guys that get cut that are going to help teams somewhere else because the other team didn't want them. And teams are going to make personnel mistakes because there's not enough time to evaluate.
Do me one favor going forward. When people ask you where you think Randy Moss is going to go and where you think Terrell Owens is going to go and Chad Ochocinco, just say, I refuse to comment. I don't care. Because what? I'm speaking for the fans here. None of us care. We don't care where these guys go.
And
we do not care.
We lead off every NFL Network show with Chad Ochocinco. And like people say, where's T.O. going to go? Look, T.O.'s 30.
Who cares?
He's not going anywhere. He had one offer last year from the Bengals. Where is he going to go? I mean, look, I know Drew Rosenhaus's job is to drum up business for T.O., but there's no business to drum. And, Randy Moss is, he struggles right now, and the only team, it's going to be very hard for him to get a job that fits his style of play today. And you better know what that style of play is when you take him. And
I think his career's over. I think his career's over. Why would anybody sign him? He sucked last year. He's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, get open.
The last year with the Raiders before he went to New England, he sucked that year too, and he came back. Now, I think he has to be under the understanding of what he can do at this point in his career. That's key. And Chad Ochocinco. I mean, look, it's everything but football with that guy. And if you're willing to bring in P.T. Barnum into your locker room, then go ahead. But I love
the concept that the Patriots might go after him. Yeah. Bill Belichick in a million years would never go after that guy.
Yeah, could you imagine the reality shows up in Foxborough? That'll go over well.
I want one of these online gambling sites to make a bet of over/under touchdowns for Ochocinco, Randy Moss, Plaxico Burress, and Terrell Owens in 2011. I'm taking the under, whatever it is.
Yeah,
I think those guys might get 5 combined.
Plaxico's another one. I mean, he's 30. He's old. He's been incarcerated for 2 years. His legs are going to have to take some time to come back. It's not going to be. He was never a fast receiver to begin with. He was always an outside. He was the power forward without speed, but he could. Yeah. But basically, he could rebound the ball, and so that's how he pushed off. He was the best. We would play Plaxico, and every time before we'd play him, you'd want to hit the officiating crew just to make sure they were aware of there is offensive pass interference in the NFL. You would remind him of that because he's the greatest pusher-offer of anybody.
And as Jamal Lewis showed us once upon a time, prison weakens legs.
Yes, it does.
The food's not good. The sleeping conditions aren't good. In general, you're sleeping badly because you're in a hostile environment. That doesn't work out great. Even somebody like Michael Vick, it took him, he didn't really have to play game in, game out for a year and a half? I can't even remember.
Yeah, and really, last preseason, there was, me included, there was a lot of people that didn't feel like Michael Vick was still
Michael Vick.
Vick. It wasn't until he showed up at the Green Bay game opening day that we said, oh, he still has it.
Yeah, and also if you sign Plax, you're getting all the baggage that comes with that. Look at this, we're talking about these guys. So I'm stopping. Go back to your wonderful vacation, Mike Lombardi, courtesy of Rich Eisen's podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Once these free agents get going, please come back.
I will be back anytime you want.
All right, we'll talk to you.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.
So I get to sign off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.